All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I am Bailey of Farmer Bailey, also of Garden Club by Farmer Bailey. You might have noticed we started a retail brand just this year for people who can't absorb wholesale quantities of flower plugs. So today's going to be a fairly basic, fairly starter presentation about fall planting for spring harvest. We'll tell you why you should do this. But we appreciate, I see some familiar names, some really smart people in the group that have been doing this for a while. So thank you for being here. Feel free to interact with other people. The flower farming, the flower gardening community tend to be really supportive of each other and like to share and like to exchange information. So I appreciate everyone being here. As Thomas mentioned, Bobby is on hand. Bobby's our horticulturist. He's going to be available to you to answer questions in the chat in real time. I won't be seeing the chat. If there's any big topics or big questions, they will be fed to me, and we'll talk about that at the end of our little presentation today. But yeah, let's just get right into it. So you may have heard about the concept of fall planting. We're really about 11 months ahead of schedule from when you reap the benefits of fall planting. You might have noticed if you've been, maybe it's your first or second year, you often have a lull after those spring bulbs, after the ranunculus, after the tulips are gone. You don't have a lot. Maybe peonies are sort of your last thing, and then you're sort of just left without much to harvest. And planting in the fall for harvesting next late spring, early summer is the way to fill that gap. It's a really old technique. It's been around, people have been growing these types of things for hundreds of years, and we kind of forgot about it. There's a little gap in our memory that we're trying to fill in here today. So let's just talk about why we do it and what you can grow. Okay, the reason why we want to fall plant, you get earlier flowers in the spring, so you could plant something in the fall, and also in the spring, those planted in the fall will bloom first. They'll be taller, they will have better stems, often with more flowers. And there's many cold hardy annuals and perennials and biennials that you can use for this. So we'll define all of those terms if you're not super familiar with them. We're going to talk a bit about zones today. You may have heard me go on a rant about zones before, what zones mean and what zones do not mean. So this is your zone map. It changes about every 10 years. They were about maybe 12 years between the last update. It just got updated recently. So if you Google, USDA plant hardiness zone map, you should get the most recent version. It changes. You may have noticed things changing around you, climate changing everywhere. And that really does affect your winters, what you can grow. You may notice things that previously were not hardy in your area are hardy now. So what does it actually mean? You've seen this map before. We're going to come back to it. Your zone tells you your lowest average winter temperature based on the map. Find where you are. You can even Google like your hometown. We used to live in Irisburg, Vermont. You could just say Irisburg, Vermont, USDA zone, and it will probably spit it out to you. The internet is very smart these days. So you're comparing a map with the needs of a plant. So your lowest average winter temperature in your location, and then that's sort of indexed against what plants have been known to survive that temperature. So the needs of the plant are not going to change. Your zone may change with time. It has changed with time. It will continue to change with time, but the cold tolerance of an individual plant is not going to change most likely. They may breed certain crops towards a certain goal, maybe to be more cold hardy. Perennial plant breeders, annual plant breeders are always looking for more vigor, more hardiness. But in general, the guidelines you find for the plant do not change. Your location may change. This is talking winter hardiness. Zones are all about winter hardiness and absolutely nothing else. They tell us nothing about your summer temperatures, about your drought conditions, about your wind, about your chance of getting hail or other factors that might affect your season. Now, as Thomas mentioned, we live in Madeira Island, Portugal. We've hardly had a day above 70 so far, but we're probably a zone 11. If you think of a zone 10 or 11, you probably think of places that are just blazing hot, maybe like Key West, Southern Florida. Well, we don't have the same summer at all. A similar winter, perhaps, in terms of our lowest temperature seen, in terms of what plants might survive. But we rarely get above 75 or 80, which is largely why we moved here. So your zone is only about winter hardiness. I'll shut up about that now, but that's a big thing that people miss. Talking about your zinnias, your dahlias, your things you plant in the spring for summer harvest, zone means nothing at all. Okay, so what is an annual? An annual is a plant that completes its life cycle in 1 year. Within 365 days, this plant will germinate, enter its juvenile stage, enter its flowering stage, make seeds, and then die. Flowers they're sex organs. Flowers are there to reproduce. That's all they want to do. They're trying to they attract attention of insects because they want to be pollinated, because they want to make seeds to make the next generation. So they go through a juvenile stage, and then they switch into a flowering stage, and then they set seeds unless you are cutting their heads off and selling them for money, which a lot of us are doing, and then they die. That's an annual. You do not have to start the calendar in springtime. Now, I had a picture of a zinnia before. That's kind of a really traditional thing you might sow in the springtime. Grows in the heat of summer, flowers, set seed. If it's still living at frost time, it just gets taken by the frost. Not all annuals have the same calendar exactly. Some might start the year before. They might start in the autumn and might live just fine through winter. So that would be the definition of a hardy annual. These are flowers which are sown, flower, and die within 1 year and can withstand frost, as opposed to tender annuals. You may hear the concept of a half hardy annual, and these are ones that fall somewhere in between. At certain stages, they are quite cold hardy. At other stages, they are not. All right, a biennial is something that really takes 2 years, maybe a year and a half to complete its full cycle. Foxgloves, digitalis is a classic example. There's a photo of a really cool Campanula, Canterbury bells type. I will talk about those more later. I'm very excited about this particular group right now. These are true biennials. You could sow them, and if you kept them warm and under long days for years, they would kind of keep growing. They would never flower because they need a cold winter, or at least a cool winter, to flower and to take that next step into the reproductive stage, their flowering stage. Okay, perennials, these are plants that come back every year. They grow and bloom over the spring and summer, die back every autumn and winter. It's not entirely true. There are some perennials that bloom in winter, some that bloom in autumn. But these are plants that live for more than 1 year at a time. They are not in such a hurry to flower sometimes. It's maybe why they take sometimes a couple years to flower, depending on the crop, because they are here for a long time, not for a good time. Now, there's a lot of gray area between some of these crops. We'll talk about that as well. There are biennials that have been bred to behave like annuals. There are perennials that we treat like biennials. We'll get into that, don't worry. Again, if you have questions, pop them in the chat here. We're here to help you. Yeah, we're gonna have a lot to talk about. Okay, you may also hear short-lived perennials. A short-lived perennial for one might be a long-lived perennial for other people. When I lived in Vermont, we were a zone 3. I think we've been changed to a zone 4. Delphinium, tough as nails, might last 10, 15 years. If you live I used to live in the Philadelphia area, you're lucky if you can get them into a second year. You're probably planting them in the fall for spring harvest, and then you're ripping them out because the summer heat kills them. So a short-lived perennial might be one of those might be short-lived in your climate because you are just a little bit out of what they prefer. Or there are some that just don't last very long and you need to be replanting them with some regularity. If you're going to plant in the fall for overwintering success, there's some things, many factors to think about. Timing, when do you put them in the ground? What kind of fertility do you have or do these plants need? Watering and winter protection. Let's get into these things. If you're planting in the fall, you don't want to hit them with so much fertilizer that they go into like lush green growth. That growth is usually tender. You have a lot of nitrogen in your soil, or you're applying a high nitrogen fertilizer. These are the kinds of crops. That's the kind of growth that will get damaged by an early frost. So the goal is not to put on top growth. We don't really care about the top growth if you're planting in the fall. The plant is really strong roots and not so much foliage. Okay, so it looks like I might have skipped over I said we were going to talk about timing, and I think we might have missed that slide, but let's talk about timing. Timing is important. It's best to start fall planting when your day length is decreasing. Now, some flowers, many flowers, dare I say most flowers, are paying attention to day length. They are counting the hours of the day. They know if we are increasing or if we are decreasing. You know that we've just had the summer solstice, so we are on the downward slide in terms of day length, and that is triggering your plants to do things. They are counting these hours. It's remarkable what they're able to do. They know exactly, if you've ever planted 100 of a day length sensitive crop and they all flower on the same day. I just think that's so fascinating that plants know how to do that, and they know where they are in the season. Some flowers will flower in a short day. Others, they see those days getting shorter. They say, I'm going to grow leaves right now. I'm going to grow roots. I'm not going to flower because winter is coming. So usually mid-September, early October is a great time to start planting. If you're a commercial grower, week 38 is that's generally the autumnal equinox. That's when we start dropping below 12 hours of light. Right now, we're in the longest days of summer, so we have a few months until the plants are ready to shut down for winter, but we have passed the point of the longest day of the year. Now, some of these crops are going to need some protection. We're going to think of this as zone by zone today. I've done presentations like this before where it's more about each crop and what each crop wants, but I wanted to kind of look at it from a different angle today. And let's start with our northernmost coldest zones and move south and just keep adding crops to the list. So there's ways, we'll talk about how you can protect your crops, how you can maybe eke out an extra zone or two. But in colder zones with marginally hardy crops, you might need to use low tunnels or frost cloth to add some winter protection. High tunnels are great. The home gardener generally isn't going to have a high tunnel. Maybe they've got a hobby greenhouse. That's great. But there's some ways that we can get around the hardiness of the plant. On that note, let's talk about warm winters. We've all noticed that our weather is not as consistent or reliable as it used to be. We're seeing 80-degree days in January on occasion, but that doesn't mean you won't still see the 20-degree, the 10-degree day a couple weeks later. So if you get these hot spells that settle in at unseasonable times, that can be bad news for your plants. They're going to think it's spring, they're going to put on lush, tender growth, and that tender growth is what's going to be most severely damaged by freezing weather. Some of us remember when things were a little more gradual up and a little more gradual down, and you could plan a little bit better as to what might happen in the season, and those days are behind us. So we're going to talk about protection. Be ready to protect these plants if you live in a place that's seeing a lot of spikes. I was born in Kentucky, my family's in Kentucky, and that's a classic place where you might have some summery weather in the middle of winter, and then you get almost a negative 20-degree spell after. Much better, plants are much better adapted at getting cold and staying cold than they are going back and forth. So be prepared for that. Another thing to think about in the wintertime is watering, maybe even how you lay your plants out or where you put them. I'm going to go back to Vermont. We were in the very northeastern part of Vermont, the Northeast Kingdom, they call it, very close to Quebec. -35, -40 was not uncommon for us when we lived there. On a sunny day in late winter, the greenhouse, the high tunnels, might still get up in the 80s and 90s. I tried to not have that happen because the same reason I just talked about, you don't want plants to be triggered into active growth when it's a little too early. But things would dry out and I would have to figure out how to water them. So I actually kept our hose wrapped up in an insulated box with a space heater. And we were generally pretty lucky at keeping the water flowing, although there were times when we were not. You're going to need to water these things in the winter, especially in a high tunnel where they're not getting natural rain, natural snow. So keep that in mind when you're planting things in the fall. They will need water. You know, if you're a home gardener, maybe that can just be done with a watering can. That's great. No harm in that. So plan ahead for winter and that early spring waterings, especially in covered structures. They don't want to completely dry out ever. It's the same as growing in the summertime. They need to be damp, but not saturated. Things in the winter also really don't like to be sitting in water or be overly moist for too long. So the best way, I mean, other than a heated greenhouse where you can grow anything at any time, would be a high tunnel. High tunnels are generally a greenhouse that is not heated. And you're going to add about 2 zones of protection. I might increase that to 3, depending on the year. You gain a lot by putting in a high tunnel. A low tunnel outside is going to give you about maybe 1 zone of protection. So if you're on the edge of a crop being hardy, that might be just the bit of help it needs to survive. You can put you can put low tunnels within a high tunnel, and you might actually pick up an extra zone. So you're talking about this big air mass in a high tunnel. It takes a lot of energy to escape for that to drop down to below freezing. Soil is a great insulator, thermal mass. You know, if you have a nice sunny day, your soil gets really warm, even if it's quite cold outside. And it's that warm soil that slowly releases its heat to your plants over those cold winter nights that keep your plants alive. So you've got a low tunnel and then a high tunnel. You've kind of got 2 blankets of insulation. So let's talk about these zones we've been talking about. I kind of think of zone 5 and colder as being the same. Obviously, there are some specific differences in hardiness. But if you're in zone 3 with a little protection, you can probably pull off some of these things. Let's talk about each one. Campanula medium. Campanula, that's the species that we grow most often as a cut flower. A little bit tender. The true biennial types might be more hardy. I will say, back to Vermont, I always reference our farm that we had in Vermont because that's my personal experience. We used to have a lot of snow. Most years, the area still gets a lot of snow. When you get 3 feet of snow, that's excellent insulation. Sometimes the ground would never truly freeze beneath all of that. And I would get zone 5 and 6 hardy plants surviving with ease outside. I would much rather have a consistent snow cover all winter than the occasional snow and ice event. That freezing thawing can be really difficult for plants to adapt to. They don't understand what is expected of them. So things like Campanula would do okay for me in northern Vermont because we had so much snow, at least we used to. Back to Delphinium. Delphinium is very hardy. If you get it in the ground early enough, it can survive zone 3, no problem. Some Dianthus are hardier than others. There's a lot of different Dianthus. The Barbados types, Barbados, these are the Sweet Williams, tend to be very hardy, no problem. They'll become a true perennial for you in the very northern climates, come back every year. Digitalis, there's several different types, which we will get into in a bit. Generally quite hardy, especially with some insulation, with some snow cover. Matricaria, Tanacetum, feverfew. I don't know why it has so many names, but it does. These also can be really hardy in a northern climate. Poppies. We're mostly talking about Iceland poppies here. They can have a good bit of hardiness. They're from Iceland, after all. And then Rudbeckia, these are the Herta types, the black-eyed Susans, and well, then we have triloba, and then you see Henry Eilers here, Pseudotomentosa, I think is a species. All of these are really quite hardy in the north. So these can be planted in September or so. If you're in the north, you want to plant a little earlier than you do in the south because your winter is coming sooner. So the whole theory is that you put things in the ground when you still have a bit of warmth left from the summer. It lets plants put out their roots. They're reading the signals of the sunlight. They know it's not time to flower. They're not putting in a lot of green growth, but they have the warmth they need to get settled in, get established before winter so they can reward you in the springtime. All right, we're going to bump down a zone. There's always some flexibility here, okay? Zone 6 can be a lot different than Zone 4. Or some years, even if you are in a Zone 4, you may actually have more of a Zone 6 winter. It just depends on the actual low temperature you hit. And it can be those 1 or 2 really cold nights that make the difference on your entire season, make the difference on what survives and what doesn't. So if you can dodge a couple of cold nights, you may actually get away with growing things that shouldn't be able to grow in your zone. So in this zone, we've added Ammi, Queen Anne's lace. There's a couple different varieties. Bells of Ireland can also survive this type of condition. Bupleurum, one of my favorite fillers. We already had Campanula medium in the northern zone. Then Daucus, carrot, so actually a carrot flower. Dianthus, again, the barbatus, the sweet William types. Very hardy, but then you can start getting into things like the Sweet series and the Amazon series in Zone 6. Again, maybe with a little bit of protection. Digitalis, Foxglove, again, very hardy. Delphinium, very hardy. Larkspur, kind of an annual Delphinium, tends to be okay in Zone 6, maybe with a bit of protection. Matricaria, again, hardy. Orlea, I would give it a bit of protection. So Orlea, Ammi, Daucus, they're all carrot relatives. They're all umbelliferous flowers, quite similar in their needs. So in 6, you could also start planting pansies maybe with a bit of protection. Most of the time, they'll survive even without. Again, poppies, Rudbeckia, Snapdragons. Snapdragons are technically okay in Zone 4, but if you get that warming, thawing thing, and they have any fresh growth on a Snapdragon, it's really going to hurt it. So I might reserve Snapdragons to a place, even in Zone 6, where you can give them a bit of protection. I would put Campanula in that same category. Like baby it a little bit, and it will reward you with a lot of flowers and much better flower quality. All right, 7 and 8, here's where you're really getting into where I think that fall planting makes the most sense, where you're going to see the biggest reward with the least risk. I did mention my old friend Lisa Mason Ziegler. You may be familiar with her book, Cool Flowers. I don't know if it can show up here or not. She wrote a book a few years ago, really about this whole topic. It's not a new topic, but it is a topic that we forgot about. I have 150-year-old gardening books that talk all about all of these crops. The plants haven't changed very much. What they need is still the same. Our knowledge of this has changed, and we don't really know what a hardy annual is anymore, which is why we're talking about it today. So pick up Lisa's book. She's got a lot of crops. We're only talking about the kind of the heavy hitters, the more popular ones today. There's a handful of other ones that you could also try. Same principle, plant in the fall, harvest in the spring. So for Zone 7 and 8, really the only addition I'm seeing here is Helichrysum. These are the straw flowers. They're a bit tender. They're always triggered into some fresh growth when you get a bit of warm weather, which makes them vulnerable to those late freezes. Stock, we've also added here Matthiola, very fragrant, just such a beautiful kind of old-fashioned flower. Probably best grown in a high tunnel or a low tunnel, just to make sure that you aren't getting those unexpected frosts. It's always so sad when you have them just starting to bud and then you get that freeze that destroys them. They're not going to recover. Stock doesn't like a bad day in its life. Heavy feeder, a lot of water. any moment of stress in stock will result in a shorter stem. If you're achieving, 3-foot tall stock, that means you've done well. You've given that stock a perfect life. Okay, zones 9 and 10, you can kind of do anything. Zone 9, I think, drops down to what, 20 degrees. That's generally child's play for hardy annuals, for biennials, for these types of perennials. Zone 10, you're home free. So this can be Florida, Gulf Coast, Texas. Surprisingly, a really great place to be growing these types of things. And maybe I know some southern growers who only specialize in these types of crops. They're not even going to mess with things in the summertime because it's just too blazing hot. You're in luck in zones 9 and 10. Like I said, we're not talking about every single crop you can treat this way, but these are the climates where you might grow scoop scabioses or gypsophila or I don't know, some of the higher value things that you don't really want to risk to freezing, but wintertime in zones 9 and 10 is the place to be. Don't let that stop you from trying further north, but you're going to have to do a little bit more work. Okay, let's talk about some specific crops here that might have a few little secrets to learn. Okay, Lisianthus. We get a lot of discussion about Lisianthus, probably because my friend Lisa talks about Lisianthus as being a cool flower. Lisianthus is an American native flower. It is from the prairie states, Texas, Oklahoma. I think it might even go up into South Dakota, if not further. It's truly a perennial. It will survive winters. It grows along stream sides, so it's used to kind of damp springs and dry summers. It also survives really baking heat, as you might experience in the prairies. I don't really recommend planting in the fall unless you are zone 8, 9, 10. It doesn't like a hot start to life. It likes to be planted into cool soil. We've written so much about Lisianthus on our website. We'll talk about where to find our growing guides. If you're zone 7 or north, don't worry about fall planting Lisianthus. You'll have really good results by planting in late winter, early spring. We really keep it in stock all year for those people growing in Florida, in the Gulf states, in Texas, maybe in parts of California. That's where you will really benefit from planting in the fall. Just to plant in that coolest part of the year. Maybe you only get one little cool part of the year. That's when Lisianthus wants to get started. Those little seedlings will put out the roots. They're deep roots, almost 3 feet into the ground sometimes, looking for water to survive when the heat of spring comes along. All right, stock. Stock likes it cool. Like I mentioned, stock is a bit of a diva. It can't take much stress at all. It never wants to dry out and never wants to go hungry. There's some crops that will forgive you if you are bad to them one day, but stock has a memory. It remembers its trauma. So it needs cool temperatures to flower. It does not tolerate extended freezes. It can take a bit of frost. Fall planting, safe in 9 plus. You could probably go a little, you can go to 7 or 8, especially if you have a tunnel and you can protect it a bit. If you're planting further north, you're probably best waiting until spring, in my experience. Happy to hear other opinions. Chime in. Just talking about general rules for people who who want to succeed with stock. Once again, heavy feeder. It's a cabbage. It's a brassica. It wants put a lot of manure. Don't give it nitrogen when you plant, but once it really gets rooted, give it just a lot of food, a lot of manure, a lot of whatever it is you choose to feed. Plant them close. 2 or 3 per 6-inch square is not too many. You can't beat that fragrance. It's such a lovely flower as long as it lasts. Generally a bit of a short season on stock, but definitely worth growing. Okay, Snapdragons and Dianthus can be treated quite similarly. Stock, kind of the same as well. Snapdragons are probably hardy to zone 4, but again, that tender growth is going to get killed. So be ready to protect. So easily into zone 7 without protection. You can expect some frost damage, especially on your Snapdragons, maybe on your Dianthus as well. They should survive and grow out of it. Zone 6 and colder, use mulch and row cover. Small, well-rooted plants fare better than those with lots of top growth. I think I'll talk about this again later. Juvenile plants, the baby plants, are the ones we want to baby. We have this concept of babies need more care, not less care. Not so in the plant world. A juvenile seedling is much more rugged than a full-grown adult plant. Now you might see a little seedling can survive a heavy freeze, a little bit bigger, maybe a light frost. You have something that's about to flower and you get a freeze, that flower is gone. The plant's probably going to die as well. So plants have different phases and different vulnerabilities at different times of their life. Okay, digitalis are biennial by nature. Humans have made them into annuals. So you might see something that says first year flowering. That term is applied to annuals. I'm sorry, it's applied to biennials and perennials. You might see in a seed catalog. FYF, you'll often see. They've been bred to be annuals. Why would they do that? Well, it's kind of annoying if you want foxglove flowers to have to put them through a cold winter. Maybe you want to plant in spring and have them flower. And they've selected plants that will do that. You may notice when you plant out 100 of something, you may have 1 or 2 that flower a lot earlier than the others. They're responding to the environmental cues in a different way. So these are your literal early bloomers. These are the ones that switch into the reproductive stage earlier than the rest of their siblings. And if you are a geneticist or if you're a plant breeder, you will look for those things and try to consolidate those traits within a series. So Dalmatian is a classic series of digitalis that have been bred to be annuals. So you plant them in the spring, they will still flower in the same year. You can also plant these in the fall, and they're going to flower earlier and bigger the following spring, but you really want to wait until the days are getting short and things are starting to cool off. So if you're in zone 6 or warmer, fall planting ensures a really strong spring bloom. You can plant these further north, no problem. If you're growing biennial types, this is going to be like Mertenensis, like apricot beauty, some of the weird little kind of botanical digitalis. These are true biennials. You can plant them anytime in summer or early fall. Early mid-September is great. Week 38, as I mentioned, is a really great time to get a lot of these things in the ground. They need some time to establish to get a bit of a crown growing so that they will flower the following year. If you plant too late, they're probably going to live, but they may not flower. So they may not. A biennial needs to be of a certain size to receive the cue of those cold days that it's time to flower. But if it's not big enough, it might just wait for another year. So if you plant a biennial that doesn't flower the following year, you probably want to plant it earlier the next year. We see this from time to time, particularly in places where winters are erratic and they're not getting a reliable cold period. All right, Delphinium. I mean, who can beat the blue of Delphinium? A lot of people in the warmer areas don't try it because it's just really short-lived. I say treat it like an annual or maybe like a biennial. Plant them in the fall. Like I said, zone 3 and 4 in Vermont, Delphinium are everywhere. Alaska, amazing. They like a cool summer. They don't care about how cold the winter is. So this is both the Casablanca, the belladonna types. That'd be like Casablanca, Cliveden Beauty would be the 2 most popular. And then you have more of the elatum types like Guardian. You tried the new Highlander hybrids that would fall in that same group. We have Candle. There's a bunch of series of Delphinium. They're such an important cut flower crop worldwide. Amazing garden flower. If you walk into a stand of well-grown Delphinium, your breath is gone. It's just every time takes your breath away. So they're worth figuring out. But the thing most people don't do is plant them in the fall. They wait until it's warm in the spring, and that's just not what Delphinium wants. Yeah, I'd say plant about 6 weeks before the first hard frost to really allow good rooting and cold acclimatization. These are ones that you're not going to need to worry about covering unless you start seeing tender growth coming out earlier than it should. Following a warm spell, Delphinium will sprout pretty quickly. So keep an eye on that new tender growth. You might need to give it a little cover, but if you have a normal winter, not going to be a problem. Rudbeckia triloba, I just love. There's a pure yellow form, and this is the prairie sunset, prairie something, that has this yellow center. Again, another American native wildflower, very hardy. They will tend to reseed a little bit, but in a pleasant way. I was never sad to see a bit of triloba reseeding. Say uncovered in zones 5+. I grew it in zone 3. Again, we had good snow cover, but really reliable. Yeah, really nothing to make a bouquet shimmer and sparkle than popping in a little bit of Rudbeckia triloba. Okay, Campanula. I need a drink to talk about Campanula. There's a lot of species of Campanula. These are bellflowers, Canterbury bells. There's a lot of them, a lot of species in the world. The most common, or the most important one for cut flower use is Campanula medium. And this is a biennial by nature. It needs to germinate in spring, summer of one year, go through a cold or very cool winter, and then it will flower the following year when it will set seeds, drop its seeds, and start the cycle again. The plant breeders noticed every now and then they would get one that would just go on and flower in its first year. And you can skip that whole stage of chilling it for winter. Wouldn't that be nice? So Champion is the series that we see most often. Now we're on the, used to be the Champion series, then Champion Pro, now we're on to Champion 2. These are all slightly different, really for commercial cut flower use. They've been bred to be more uniform in terms of their bloom time, in terms of their size, in the range of colors. So you get these, they call it blue, it's really purple. You get a lavender, a white, a rose, which is kind of a lavender pink. There's a light pink, and there's some interesting in-between tones as well. They don't need the cold period to flower. They do need long days to flower. So long days are more than 12 hours. If you plant a little baby plug in the middle of summer when there's more than 12 hours of light, it will flower right away. If you order these plugs, we try not to sell them this time of year, but some people have the ability to control their day length. If you plant them out in the middle of summer, probably within 2 weeks, you'll see buds on these things, and they're going to flower right away on about a 2-inch stem. So that's not what you want. You want to plant them in the cool part of the year and the darker part of the year. Generally, when your day length is below 12 hours or less, maybe 10 hours would be really safe. That's going to start in mid-September, early October. So I would plant these starting in, put them sometime in October. You definitely want to wait until after week 38, that is mid-September, but push them even a little bit later. And they're not going to flower until they get those long days. That will give them time to put out roots to grow a bit of growth. You can plant them in the spring, plant them before early March, mid-March at latest. Week 10, if you're a commercial grower, these need to be in the ground before then. Now, you may not be able to work in your garden outside of that time, which means these need to go in a tunnel. I'm sorry about that, but that's just what's going to give you these beautiful 3- and 4-foot stems. I've seen a lot of social media content, a lot of posts from growers this year who are really nailing Campanula, and I love that. We've been trying to educate on this crop for a while because it's easy to get wrong. I've seen a lot of people get it wrong in the past, so I'm really happy to see that maybe this general knowledge about Campanula is getting out there. People are getting it in the ground at the right time. Really easy to grow if you hit it right, but it's very, very day length sensitive here in its annual form. As I mentioned, Campanula is naturally a biennial. The wild Campanula medium, which which is a Central European species. These are the Canterbury bells, the cup and saucer types. These really want, these are biennials. They must have a winter chill. If they don't get it, they're not going to flower. You might get this big rosette of growth that goes on for a year or two until it just, gets tired. But these are biennials. Last year, 2 years ago, we started selling this Evergreen series on Farmer Bailey. We don't have these yet for Garden Club. We're working on that for the future. These are one of the more exciting things I've seen come along in a while. Fiona is the name of the breeder. She's a wonderful woman in the Netherlands. We got to visit with her back in May when we were in the Netherlands looking at peonies. Just really breeding Campanula to a whole other level. At the moment, these are all still biennials. She's working on breeding them into more of an annual type that could be grown from seed. But these biennials have to be produced from tissue culture, so they are more expensive. But if you plant them on time, you can get 8 or 10 stems per plant, which will justify the cost of the plant. Again, we'll hopefully add these to the Garden Club lineup, but probably not until 2026. You're lucky if you're a commercial grower shopping at Farmer Bailey. We will have these this year. We've just gotten confirmation. We'll have 8 varieties, including some new ones. This is either Mont Blanc or Kilimanjaro. I'm sorry, I don't remember in the photo. The range is incredible. Again, need to be planted in mid-September to early October. So they grow a nice big root system. They make a nice rosette of foliage. These get pretty big. Plant them about 1 foot apart. When you start seeing a flower shoot in the spring, pinch it out. And that way you'll get 8 or 10 flowers that, that are still probably 3 feet tall rather than one that's 5 feet tall. I'm really excited about these. Zone 5, no problem. Maybe even cooler, especially with a bit of protection. So stay tuned. I think we're going to see some really great stuff that Fiona and her father are bringing to market in the world of Campanula. Okay, Iceland Poppies. They're going to need some protection, partially because it's really hard to produce these from seed. We have to ship them to you generally in November. They take a long time to make a little plug. They hate heat. They cannot stand heat at all. So even in their early stage, no heat. Think about Iceland. It's generally never hot there. So you have to wait quite a while. We can't really start sowing them until maybe September. They ship to you in October, November. But they're really good at being cold. So no problem planting Iceland poppies in the middle of winter. You can plant pansies at the same time. They're similarly hardy in the wintertime. The challenge would be if you have this, tender plug coming out of a warmish greenhouse, a cool greenhouse, but still above freezing, and you put it right into a zone 3 or 4 climate and you get a heavy freeze. Not going to work out the best for the poppy. You should probably plant that in March or April when things are starting to warm up rather than in the fall. If you're in zone 7 or warmer, November is really a really ideal time. You may follow 3 Porch Farm, our good friends Steve and Mandy down in Georgia. They plant these in the autumn. And if you just look at their photos, you see the success they're getting. Just giant stems. Most of the winter, they're getting a 10-week harvest on this crop. It's just such a lovely crop. Nothing more romantic. The Hummingbird series is probably a tetraploid. It's bigger. It's a lot bigger than your standard poppies. They don't put out as many flowers. Champagne bubbles, a little bit smaller, going to be more productive, but the hummingbirds, you got to grow some of them because they're just so big and luxurious. We love Iceland poppies. We're excited for everyone to try them this year. We should have them for Garden Club as well as Farmer Bailey. We really want home gardeners to have access to some of these genetics that have been solely in the realm of commercial growers for a while. Interesting, they've been bred in Italy, so you wouldn't think that Iceland and Italy have a lot in common in terms of climate, and they don't. But the Icelandic summer must be a bit like the Italian winter, and that's where they have their common ground. They will shut down when you start getting heat in the summertime. I always had them into July in Vermont, but further south, you may only get 6 good weeks of harvest, but what a glorious 6 weeks those are. All right, we're going to switch over in a minute to some question and answer. If you want some more crop-specific information, go to farmerbailey.com or gardenclubplants.com. On both of those websites, there's a contact us form. We're happy to help you with your questions. I'm always available. Bobby is very available, and that's what he's here for. We really want you to understand these things to succeed. I didn't get into specific varieties in this particular presentation. We wanted it to be a bit more about, selection depending on where you're from, the differences in zones. But now we're going to switch over to some question and answers. All right, let me stop sharing here for a minute. If a plant snaps in November and then again in February, will have a longer season, or will they all bloom at the same time? You will see 2 different bloom times by and large. You get earlier bloom from the fall planted ones, and the spring planted ones you will get a later bloom from. Now, Snapdragons, there's different bloom groups. This is getting a bit more technical for the commercial growers. You can stagger your bloom time by planting different bloom groups. 1 flowers first. There's a 0, which would be for winter production, and 4 flowers last. So by all means do that. It's a great way to stagger, but even planting the same variety, 4 or 5 months apart will get you a different result. There's a question about putting up a hoop house. Do it. I'm not going to get into, there's so many factors to think about. Find a local, my big suggestion when you're putting up a hoop house, a high tunnel, build it as big as you can, and also find a local supplier provider. They know your weather conditions. There's a lot of big online companies that sell these things. The shipping of the steel is wildly expensive, so try to get it locally, and also talk with the locals. In Vermont, ours came from our neighboring state, New Hampshire, because they were built to generally withstand our heavy snow loads, although we did have a very memorable snow collapse event. So you don't want that. What you can plant in the field in the fall in northern New England, you just want to get on the early side of things. So get these in the ground in September. I would plant your biennial foxgloves, your delphinium. These are things that are currently available on the store. I should have mentioned that our general season for fall shipping starts on July 1st. That's for Farmer Bailey. The wholesale side, the commercial grower side, July 1st is when we post additional inventory for the fall. Garden Club, the retail side, 1 week later. Don't worry, you've got plenty of time to order these things. But at the moment, on Farmer Bailey, you can order full trays of biennial foxglove, of delphinium, and getting those in the ground a bit early is not going to hurt you. As we mentioned, biennials will need that cold period before they flower, so you can plant them in the late part of summer. Get a nice size on that rosette, that crown, that will flower next year. Someone planted their stock in November. It was done blooming before Mother's Day. They're hoping to have it for Mother's Day. Timing crops is really, really difficult. You really need precise control of your crops, and even then you might not get it right. If you can control light and temperature, not just light intensity, but day length, you can maybe time these things a bit. This is why the commercial growers, people who really specialize in things like having stock every week of the year, are planting every week of the year in the same, controlling all the variables. It's really hard to get it right. Growing in a range of varieties can sometimes spread out your harvest time, but unless you're able to really control every variable, it can be a bit tricky. Someone asked about what fertilizer to use. Something low in nitrogen is going to be the best thing to do. Nitrogen promotes green growth, promotes leaves, promotes height. we don't want that in the fall in particular. You'd be better off not fertilizing than fertilizing with a high nitrogen fertilizer. Someone's having trouble overwintering digitalis, and I see that Bobby answered, yes, it can't be sitting in water. That's really the golden rule for all these things. They want access to water, but they do not want to sit in water at all. There's a few perennials that will be okay with wet feet. It's not that many of them. It's none of the things we've talked about today. Today, we've really just talked about things that you can grow from a small plug into a beautiful flower the next spring. We sell a lot of other perennials. We sell peonies. We sell, larger size perennials in the fall. We haven't talked about those crops because that would take us 3 hours to get through all of them. We'll have to do another talk just on our larger perennial selection. We're really just talking about what you can take in small plug form and succeed with in 1 year. And even then, it's not all of them. There are some that we've glossed over tonight. How often do you water in the winter? Really is going to depend on your soil, on your conditions. Maybe weekly, maybe less, maybe more. This is your best tool for figuring out your soil moisture. Just stick your finger in the soil. Or if you can't judge by the color of it, generally I can look at the soil from 100 feet away and tell you if it needs to be watered or not. You'll get there if you don't know that innately. Keep an eye on it. If it looks dark and wet, it probably doesn't need to be watered, but these little babies do need access to water all winter long. This is a perennial sweet William. In Vermont, it would just become a blanket and it will bloom every year and no problem. I think it wants to probably have a cool summer. I bet a hot summer might knock down sweet Williams. You might plan on replanting that every September so you get a really good bloom the following year. Yeah, by all means, cut back the flowers. If you haven't harvested every flower, at least cut them off. Plants want to reproduce. That's what flowers are. They are reproductive organs. So after they flower, they get pollinated, they set seeds. Seeds are really resource intensive for a plant to make. They will rob the roots of energy, or the plant will donate the energy from its roots to making seed. And if you don't have, if you keep a lot of seeds on the plant, you might weaken your roots for the following years. Keep things trimmed back if you are hoping for them to perennialize. Delphinium is great for that. It really wants to make seed and lots of it. And you will drain the strength of those roots. As soon as the Delphinium is done, cut it back to the ground and it will reflower often. And it won't make seeds. Rodent and rabbit damage, I'm not going to get into that. There's a lot. Fences, dogs. I love dogs. Dogs and cats. Get a bunch of them. Maybe we have some thrips and maybe botrytis issues in poppies. You got to control thrips. You have to understand thrips. You have to learn where to look for thrips. I saw someone recently, may have been in a sweet pea group, who was asking about, they showed a photo that was clearly a thrips decimated sweet pea flower. And they asked everyone, like, well, what's my problem here? And someone said thrips. They're like, no, I don't have many thrips. If you have one thrips, and thrips are always thrips, there is no one thrip. If you have one thrips, you have 1 million thrips. They are tiny, tiny, tiny. They lay eggs in the stems of your plants. They are deep in the flower. If you can find one, you have found 1 million. It's kind of like a cockroach. They can hide very easily, but if you find one, you've got a lot. You've got a problem. I started using here, actually just last week, and again tomorrow. If you go back to our talk with Copert, or naturalenemies.com. Copert is a biological control company. They create products, organic products based on biological systems for organic and sustainable pest control and pathogen control. They have a product called Icerid. It's a fungus, and you spray it, and it actually will, if you build up enough of it in your environment, will attack thrips. It'll turn them to mush before they can reproduce. so it can break the cycle. If you have thrips problems, you let it go too far. So you really need to be preventative with thrips. There's a lot of information out there. Certainly chemicals can help, but chemicals can also throw off your, you can throw off the cycle. So predatory mites and some of these biological fungal, like beneficial fungi, are probably the way to go. I would reference Copert Biologicals or naturalenemies.com. We have a link on our website. You can go to these products. They have a really great, really smart team. They will guide you through these. But you have to start before you have the problem. If you have a problem this year, you will have that problem next year, guaranteed. Poppies are also susceptible to fungal damage. Botrytis will get into the buds, especially on the colibris or the hummingbirds, the big types. I would recommend growing them under cover by and large, unless you live in a place that doesn't have much rain or even dew in the springtime. Getting water into those buds is just kind of the kiss of death. Champagne bubbles is a smaller series, more like the wild type, more resilient. They can handle a bit more weather and a bit more adverse conditions. You got a Farmer Bailey customer asked about a kiwi mellow. It's one of these green fuzzy Dianthus is carnation types. They can definitely be overwintered, but they might need some protection. These have not really been bred for northern climate production. That said, these fuzzy green ones are more, they have a high proportion of Dianthus barbatus, the sweet William in them, probably fine in zone 6, but be prepared to give them a bit of cover. We started selling carnations last year to our Farmer Bailey wholesale customers. These are going to need a bit more protection. These are, I believe, a Mediterranean crop. They come from a very mild winter place. They like it cool. They're going to grow best in the cooler part of the season, but they're not super cold hardy. So plan to put those in a high tunnel or give them a little protection if you've got erratic weather. Question about how many stock to put per 6 square inch. If you get the support netting, the Hortinova netting that's most commonly available, those little squares are 6 inches. It's a really great way to figure out your spacing on a lot of crops. Stock and snaps, 2 or 3 per 6 inches is fine. That close spacing will help them grow upwards. These are crops that stock we do sell, maybe both, we sell in a multi-seeded plug specifically for this reason. Don't try to separate them out. If you see like 4 or 5, 6 seeds, just decapitate the weakest ones. Keep your 3 strongest. Any more than 3, you're getting a little bit too much, but just plant them together. If you have some plugs with one plant per plug, plant them with a buddy. Crowding is really helpful for these things. Question about when to plant Campanula. Again, after planting into the shorter, cooler days is the best time. This will be for the Champion series. If you're planting the true biennial types, you can plant them anytime, it's fine. I'm getting a question about the Delphinium and how to get big, thick stems. I was just at the Chelsea Flower Show in May, and if you've ever seen photos, there's the Delphinium Society, and they grow this just mind-blowing Delphinium. And then Blackmore and Langdon is this outfit that has been around probably for more than 100 years, growing tuberous begonias bigger than my head, and also Delphinium that are taller than I am. The English know a thing or two about growing things to perfection. Yeah, if you can thin your Delphinium down to maybe 3 shoots per plant, this will be in a place where you're getting multiple years of growth. Your first year, you're probably not going to get, you probably only see 1 shoot, you harvest, you might get, 2 or 3 to grow back in its place. But yeah, if you're getting really thin, spindly stems, consider thinning your shoots down to maybe 3 or 4 per plant on a big plant. Pinching Campanula, you can do it. So if you've grown Campanula before, maybe you get like one really nice 3-foot stem. This would be the champion, the annual series. It can be tall, it can sometimes be too tall. If you were to pinch out that shoot when it first comes out of the ground, you're going to get side shoots, and they will be better quality if you pinch that first shoot out early. It's going to hurt your feelings because you're ready for flowers. You've been waiting all winter for flowers, but it will work. The thing is, if you're planning to do this, I would put them on about at least 9-inch spacing, if not 12-inch spacing, so you get more room for those things to develop. Now, we sell Campanula in a 210 cell tray. It's actually 216. It's a lot of plants. So maybe you put, I don't know, 100 of them at 6-inch spacing to get that first flush. And then you put the rest at a wider spacing, pinch out the middle. You'll probably get 5 or 6 flowers per plant that way. Maybe slightly shorter. They'll still be 2 feet tall, very usable, and they will bloom later than those first ones. That would be a nice way to get, a delayed harvest in your Campanula. It's not going to be weeks apart. It might only be 5 or 6 days apart, but maybe you can hit your markets. Put them in the cooler. They hold well in the cooler if you cut them closed. Campanula should be cut when that first flower is just barely starting to open. I will say with a lot of the Instagram photos I've seen this year, people are cutting them really open, and they're still going to last okay. But if you can cut them in that tighter stage, they're going to last 2 or 3 weeks in the vase, and people are going to love them and come back every year. Campanula is something that people really passed over for a while, but I think there's some excitement building around it, and I'm happy to see that. One of my favorite crops to grow. Someone asked if tissue culture Campanulas will live for multiple years. I'm really not sure. Let us know how they turn out for you. We always want to hear from you. We don't always have all the answers. I hate to say that, but we don't always know everything. I want to know everything. Someday I will know everything, but today I don't. So please let us know your results, especially on these new crops. A lot of them have been bred for, high-tech commercial production in the Netherlands. Some of them have been bred for production in Ecuador and Colombia and other places, but we don't always know how these are going to respond in much of America. So we didn't talk about anemones. There's a question about growing gemstone anemones. On the website, there's some links to Cicada. Cicada is the breeder of these anemones. We also sold the Mistral series of anemones from Biancheri. It's the Italian series. They can definitely be planted in early winter, late fall, but they can't be cold. You can't just throw them outside and let them get chilled. They need to be kept above a certain threshold. Both of these companies have really detailed culture sheets. I'm going to advise everyone who's growing flowers to read. And that doesn't mean I'm not trying to be dismissive of anyone. There's a lot of information out there, and some of these crops are really technical. They're really tough. But if you get it right, they're great. So just because we sell it doesn't mean you're going to plant it and it's going to succeed. We used to try to only sell things that we knew you would succeed with, but that limited those growers who wanted to try the more technical things. And anemones are not easy when you grow from plugs. They're Mediterranean crop, like Southern California. You could probably plant them out in November, December, and you would have naturally the conditions they need. But if you're outside of that range, you're going to need a bit of heat. You're going to need to keep them cool, but not frozen. These are not foolproof. These are not super rugged, but you can actually get as good of a harvest of anemones from a fall planted plug as you can from a tuber. So I am almost certain we have growing guides under the gemstone anemone tab in our store. If we don't, it'll be there by tomorrow. And in our growing guide, there's a lot to read about it. But if you can follow the directions. Now you may not have a heated greenhouse, you may be in the wrong place, and that might not be the right crop for you. So I don't want to be I'm not trying to be unkind or dismissive, but some things are just really technical, and if you don't follow the guidelines, they're just not going to be worth your money. All right. My top five all-time favorite cool annuals. Campanula we talked about for sure. Pansies, they're having a moment right now. We love pansies. They're super tough. They last a really long time. I think more people need to be growing pansies. A couple times lately, I've been in the US doing photo shoots, and I try to buy pansies, and they're all sold out because no one's growing enough pansies. So I say more pansies. I was gonna say Delphinium is not truly an annual, but you can grow it like an annual. You can't argue with that color. Poppies. They're a little finicky, but nothing like a big armful of those giant hummingbird poppies. And probably for fragrance, I'm gonna have to say stock. There's nothing quite like it. It's kind of a one and done. You just get one nice harvest a year, but what a lovely harvest it is. What can be successfully fall planted and used as potted plants in spring? That's a really great question, and that's probably more for our garden club customers. There's a real advantage to growing these types of things in pots because if you get that cold night, you can drag that pot into your garage and not worry about row cover and high tunnels and all of this kind of thing. I think if you imagine like if you've seen what a stem of Campanula looks like, take a big pot, maybe like an 18-inch pot, put 3, 5 Campanula plugs in there and let them go, or even pinch them out so you get multiple stems from each one. What a show that's going to put on. It's really an easy way to have a giant impact that no one else is going to have. Every now and then at, I don't know, Whole Foods, you'll see a puny little pot of some kind of greenhouse grown Campanula, but it's nothing like get a 3-foot Campanula growing in a big pot. You may have seen Lenny Larkin, my good friend Lenny, Flower Farming for Profit. She and I were just in England looking at gardens, and we were at Great Dixter, which is one of the most famous gardens in the world. And they had these big pots, giant pots, like 10 of them with annual baby's breath, annual Gypsophila, Covent Garden. And it was the most luxurious thing I've ever seen, probably for 99 cents a seed. They sowed all of that. And yeah, putting a few showy annuals in a pot is a really great way, I don't know, to celebrate spring, to show off a little bit. I'm planning to do more of that myself here. I always think I have it's like expensive pot, you have like a 20, 30, $40 pot. You want to put an expensive plant in that pot. Don't think that way. Put something showy in there, even if it's only costing you a couple dollars to fill that pot with flowers. Someone in a really warm place, 9B, Florida, when should they be planting? You still have a lot of heat coming on at that time of year. I would say, I think you see a lot of people in that region planting around Thanksgiving. You can push it later than other people for sure. It's going to depend a bit on the crop, but after Thanksgiving, you should be pretty safe to plant almost everything. Again, the question about size of stock. Is there a good variety for a 9B? I'm guessing you're just not getting much cool weather, or you're getting cool weather that's interrupted with hot weather. There's not really a heat adapted stock to my knowledge. I would just get it in the ground and give it a lot of food right away, grow it as fast as you can. But again, I would plant maybe around Thanksgiving time when your days are getting short and you're as cool as possible. Question about Tweedia and GM in zone 10A. I don't know. I have GM, so we live in Madeira, Portugal. Our coldest temperature is about 48 in winter. I've had GM over winter now for 2 years. It's not flowering that well, so I think it might want a bit of chill. They're from Chile. I'm really not sure. Tweedia is actually hardier than we give it credit for. It can, it might be like a zone 8, 7, 8 type. It could probably be fall planted. I don't have firsthand experience. I would value anyone else's opinion on that. I always thought it was like a really warm tropical thing, and I never tried it on the shoulder season. But I know that in its second year, you get much bigger stems and a much nicer harvest. Right, I didn't talk about, once again, I didn't talk about our perennials. We have a lot of perennials that we offer through Grow and Sell through Terra Nova out in Oregon. We also, do sell started perennials in a larger size. Well, we sell perennial plugs and larger size perennial transplants. We have a lot of peonies and we have a lot of eremeris. We were just in the Netherlands in May, checking out the peony fields, meeting with growers, learning about that process. So we have a lot of peonies and eremeris still available. It's still kind of early season, but we're noticing that the supply tends to the supply is not meeting demand in recent years. So we're trying to make sure we have access to these things. We're securing quantities earlier in the season. So these are available now. When they are gone, they're probably gone. So don't miss those on the website. Thank you all again for posting pictures. I'm excited to see all the eremeris that you all have posted from last year. I truly thought it might take 2 years to establish, and you are getting really great harvests already. So we learn a lot from you, from your photos, but also when you email us. I think that's about it for me today. If we didn't answer your question today, by all means, get in touch with us. We're available to you all the time. We're in a lot of different time zones, so we can get to you whenever we need to, or whenever it's convenient for you. Again, gardenclubplants.com, farmerbailey.com. We're here for you. It's the same team, regardless of what website you are reaching. But our success is your success. Thank you very much. I encourage you to try some things this fall and let us know how it works out. Bye.